Okay, so I already met many of you, but I'll present myself nevertheless. My name is Yossi Kuperwasser. I'm a retired Brigadier General from the IDF. I was the director of the Research and Analysis Division of the Defense and Military Intelligence for long 5 years, and much of it I spent on the Iranian issue that I'm going to speak about right now. I had the pleasure, I was in office back in 2002 when we put on the international table, the international agenda for the first time, the fact that there is a military nuclear project in Iran, and we managed to figure that out of all kinds of pieces of a puzzle that didn't easily fit together, but we were able to say this is a military plan. This was back in 2002. If you remember correctly, in 2003 something happened because of what we did, and upon the pressure put on Iran by the international community, they had to start postponing the activities of the military side of the project and focused on improving their capabilities on enrichment, and the rest is history, as we say. So we'll go to the end of this history, where we stand today. What I want to speak about is the different elements of Iran's problematic behavior recently that cause growing Western frustration and has all kinds of implications, and to come up with some recommendations about what should be done in order to cope with this situation. So what is the Iranian policy that we see right now that is that arouses such anger and rage around the world? First of all, I think what touched most people is the fact that the Iranians happen to support the Russian war effort in Ukraine by supplying the Russians with the Shahed 136 unmanned air vehicle that is being used very intensively by the Russians in the war in Ukraine, according to everybody who wants to say the real situation, with the exception of the Iranians who still are not ready to admit it. When you look at this step by the Iranians, you ask yourself, why did they get involved in a war that they are not a side of? That's what was their motivation? I think what brings them to the war is their feeling that they can become a part of alliance of groups that want to see a change in the world order, and they are also a part of this group of people who want to see a different world order, not one that is run by the West, not one that is run by the United States, who they consider to be the big Satan because of things that I'm not going to deal with right now. They want to see this world order changed, and they are ready to support the Russians in their effort to bring the same result with their own effort. And they are also close in this respect to the Chinese, who also want to change the world order. But there is a difference. Whereas Russia and to a large extent China are involved in the great powers competition, and for them it's a strategic issue that's dealing with their position in the struggle between the superpowers. For Iran, this is a messianic mission. They are on an ideological quest, not on just power quest. It also has a power implication, but this is beyond power. This is a messianic quest. They have to spread Islam and their version of Islam around the world and make sure that it's gaining power everywhere, especially in the Middle East, but not only in the Middle East, beyond the Middle East as well. And that's why they put so much pressure, so much effort in supporting the Russians. The other issue is that they believe that the Russians are their friends, and the Russians are going to protect them in all kinds of struggles and problems they have to contend with in other arenas, especially because of the pressure put on them with the sanctions, the international sanctions that the Americans put on them, and the issue of the nuclear issue as well. Secondly, the Iranians are now involved in brutal suppression of the protests in Iran. They regard these protests as a real threat to the stability of the regime, of the survival of the regime. Not only because this is what the protesters say, they want the regime changed. So it's very easy to understand that they are a threat to their stability and survival. But also because they understand that if they make any concessions to the protesters, this is going to be looked upon as a beginning of a slippery slope that would eventually force them to give up the revolution. That would eventually force them to give up the revolution. That's why they understand that there's no way of capitulating to the demands of the protesters. Maybe tactically, but not really. And in order to deal with the protests that go on for almost 4 months now, they have to take severe measures and make sure that nobody dares to do anything. And we see the executions, and we see the shooting against the protesters, and we see everything that they do. They are fighting for their lives, and they do that without any inhibitions. So, and of course, this causes a lot of rage around the world. And we see a lot of solidarity with the protesters around the world. But I'll say a word about it later. This solidarity is far from being impressive. It's there, but it's far from being impressive. Third issue is their ongoing support of terror proxies around the Middle East, and an effort to dominate and destabilize the Middle East and eliminate opponents and dissidents. We see that all over the place. First of all, in the Middle East was their intervention in Iraq, their intervention in Syria, their intervention in Lebanon, their intervention in Yemen, and they would like to intervene in more places if they just could. So that's one phase of it. We see their support to the Palestinian terror groups, to Hamas, to Palestinian Islamic Jihad. We just had to carry out this morning a very big operation in Jenin area against the Palestinian Islamic Jihad that ended up with probably something like 9 people killed in Jenin. The people who finance and have total command of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad are the Iranians. So we are fighting the destabilization effort of the Iranians even in the territories we control, or we are supposed to control, or the territories the Palestinian Authority has to control and doesn't, so we have to control them ourselves. And that's part of this effort. But trying to kill Masih Alinejad in New York, trying to kill Iranian dissidents in Europe, all over Europe, trying to come up with an idea of how to get rid of Mike Pompeo, the former Secretary of State, the American Secretary of State. These are all efforts that the Iranians are involved with day in, day out, trying to make it happen. Fortunately, not always successfully, because the international community, including Israel, are on alert and doing whatever is necessary in order to prevent them from any major achievements, but they are trying and they keep trying. Fourthly, they have a continuous progress towards military nuclear capability without international monitoring, and that's something that has to worry each and every one of us. I don't know if many of you have heard what the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency said yesterday in the European Parliament, but he said Iran has to be watched very closely because they already have 70 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%, and 1,000 kilograms, 1 ton of uranium enriched to 20%, which means that they can, within very short period of time, convert this uranium into military level, and they will be able to produce a couple of nuclear weapons within a short period of time. I'll come to that issue in a minute. That's grossy. We'll talk about that in a second in more depth. So this, of course, worries the international community. And as we know, the international community, especially the United States, but not only, is committed to not allowing Iran to have a nuclear weapon. How do you compromise the statement that Iran should not have a nuclear weapon and we shall not allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon with the fact that the Iranians already have all this enriched uranium in their disposal is a very big question mark. I think General Avivi referred to that in the beginning. It's nice to say we shall not let it happen, but the fact is that they are that close already. So it's what is being done in order to make sure it doesn't happen. And finally, they continue to build the capability to strike Israel and with their support of anti-Semitism. And I'm saying it because this, unlike the other issues I mentioned, does not create any outrage against Iran. The first issue, 4 issues, do create some sort of an outrage against Iran. This attitude of the Iranians towards Israel is regarded as, yes, of course, that's Iran. What else would you expect? And I'm saying it also because we are today on the International Day of Remembrance of the Holocaust. We're talking about a country that promotes the Holocaust as something to be followed, that holds competitions about caricatures about the Holocaust. And the international community does simply nothing about it. Just no attention is being given to that problem. That's something that's beyond my understanding. So but the 4 first issues do create some outrage on the international arena, especially from the West, because it's against the interest of the West in one way or another. So what is the West doing? First, a lot of words. We heard the American State Department saying that because of the Iranian support to the Russians with the UAVs, Iran may be complicit in war crimes. What do you mean, maybe? Isn't it complicit in war crimes? It is complicit with war crimes, not maybe. But everybody is very cautious not to say something they don't want to say. Secondly, everybody deals with the IRGC designation as a terror organization. Should we do that? Shouldn't we do that? What does it mean? Aren't we taking a big risk if we are going to adopt a policy that designates the IRGC as a terror organization? The United Kingdom discusses it. The United States said clearly we did it and we are not going back. That was very nice. But the rest of the European Parliament adopted a resolution calling upon the EU to adopt such a step. Joseph Borrell, the foreign minister of the EU, said we need to see if there is a legal, if the court is going to approve it or not. It's not anybody is rushing towards identifying or designating the IRGC as a terror organization. This is ridiculous. The IRGC is the biggest terror organization in the world. That's what they do from the moment they wake up until the moment they want to go to sleep, and they hardly sleep. That's their business, carrying out terror attacks. Everything I mentioned before is being done by the IRGC. The support to extreme terror organizations is done by the IRGC. The supplying of weapons to Hezbollah, to the instruction of Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. All of that is being done by the IRGC. The efforts to kill dissidents around the world is done by the IRGC, including in Europe and in the United States. God knows what keeps people from calling spade a spade. And, but even if you do, what impact is it that going to have on the 4 problematic behaviors of the Iranians? If you declare the IRGC terror organization, is that going to stop or change anything in this behavior? Adding sanctions. So the US is still with the sanctions put forward by President Trump, but doesn't implement them with the same vigor as the previous administration. The Canadians, the EU, have added all kinds of sanctions, both on people involved in the UAV business and on people involved in suppressing the protests, which is nice. And every couple of weeks, more people are under sanctions. Again, this kind of sanction designating a certain person who was involved in executing protesters, is that going to have really an impact on the Iranian behavior? The JCPOA status. So we are playing with the game. Well, is it dead or not? I couldn't resist myself from mentioning here, for all of you who are familiar with the Princess Bride picture that I love and adore, Billy Crystal, as the sorcerer, there says that there's a big difference between mostly dead and all dead. And if you're mostly dead, you can still be saved because you have true love. True love. So for those who love the Princess Bride, true love, this is the feeling that many people in the West have towards the JCPOA. True love. And they keep it alive. Even though they know it's dead, but it's only mostly dead. It's not all dead. So we can keep it alive. And keep the feeling amongst the Iranians that at any given time they can go back to the JCPOA if they just give up under crazy demand that the IAEA would give up the demand that they will give them some explanation about the undeclared sites where nuclear activity was carried out until 2003, or at least until 2003, then they can have the JCPOA revived at any given time. That's a crazy situation we have the JCPOA, and as President Biden said to this lady on November 4th, it is dead, but we are not going to declare it's dead. It's mostly dead, okay? That's what he was trying to say. And this is a very strange situation. Of course, true love is the most, is the greatest thing in the world, except for a nice MLT, which is a sandwich made of mutton, lettuce, and tomato. Yeah. That's what is being said by the source. Supporting the protesters. The international community supports the protesters, right? They want to allow them access to Starlink and these kind of things to help them. Not really. The supporters are the protesters are on their own. There's no comparison between the kind of solidarity Ukraine is getting and the kind of solidarity the Iranian protesters are getting. Nothing to even resemble the kind of support. And if you are an Iranian protesters, you know, you're on your own. You have to do it yourself. It's a very problematic situation. Isolation. People say we isolate Iran. Nobody isolates Iran. Look, we know what isolation can look like. Look at what the international community does regarding Russia and Belarus. Nothing of the kind is being done against the Iranians. They can participate in any event, raise their flag, and nobody is going to say anything. These are the people who carry out all these four problematic and fifth problematic behavior that I mentioned before. Credible military option. Some people say that there is a credible military option, but everybody is very shy of mentioning it. So we speak about it only, if you're an Israeli, you can speak about it. If you're an American, you hold joint exercise with the Israelis, hoping that the Iranians will watch and say, there must be some credible military option. Well, the Iranians are not convinced that these hints really mean something. And sorry, it was a mistake. So far, nothing to make Iran, I don't know what's lean, make Iran worry. That's the situation right now. The Iranians are not worried, and they keep on moving forward on all these 5 elements of the problematic behavior, in spite of everything that the West is doing. So what we see is that Iran, because of that, continues to improve their capability to break out towards a small nuclear arsenal. Now people try to feel better, to make themselves feel better by saying, yes, but even if they enrich uranium to 90%, they will still need something like 2 years before they can actually have a weapon. I do not buy that. I'm sure that the Iranians are doing all kinds of stuff simultaneously to shorten the time necessary to move from having the 90% enriched uranium, the military level, and having the bombs. The fact that we don't know about it just means that they do it properly. And they do it in a way that we cannot reach the information about what they do, because we don't have any, nobody has any real monitoring of what's happening with the experts that are supposed to do that, because according to the agreements, such access was not allowed to the monitors, and now there is even much less monitoring capability than what was promised by the JCPOA. So there's no way to know what the Iranians are actually doing. And if I was an Iranian, that would have been exactly what I would do. I would move towards shortening the time necessary from having 90% enriched uranium and having a bomb, because this is the sensitive area that they have to cross. Secondly, they get closer to improving their defense capabilities with Russian help. They are getting the Sukhoi 35, they are getting improved anti-aircraft systems, they are getting money for the weapons they sell. When anybody is going to do something about the Iranian facilities, it will have to deal with more defenses, more problems, more challenges, more complicated challenges, and more capabilities of the Iranians to retaliate if something happens. And that's what's happening now with the Russian support. It keeps its attitude of repressing the protesters. Nothing has stopped. On the contrary, what we see recently is some sort of going down in the amount and the impact of the protests. There are less protests. It's not over, but there are less protests, because the protesters understand that the world is not enough with them, and because the regime understands the same thing, that it has the carte blanche to keep working on that direction. And it's definitely free to stick to its regional anti-Israeli policy. Nobody even mentions that. From time to time, you see the Americans stop a ship carrying arms to Yemen, and that's it. The only people who do something about it is Israel. We keep mowing the grass in Syria. Nice, we have some impressive results, but we are the only ones. In a way, the sanctions adopted so far enable the West to feel that something was done, so we feel better, we have a better feeling. We did something, we are discussing putting the IRGC on the terror list. We put some sanctions against a certain judge that was involved in suppressing the protesters. Aren't we nice people? Aren't we good people? We are very good people. The fact that it has no impact is another story. Nobody expects us to have impact. We are just supposed to do things that will help us look at ourselves in the mirror in the morning and say to ourselves, we are good people. Not enough. Yes, Iran is suffering from American sanctions and from protests, but much more needs to be done. And here's a list of things that should be done rapidly, today, not tomorrow. First of all, snapback of the JCPOA and putting the sanctions back, the full sanctions. What are you guys waiting for? Grossi told you. 70 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% and 1,000 kilograms of uranium enriched to 20%. What else do you need before you snap back and impose the sanctions again? It's amazing. Isolation, do what you did with Russia, do it against Iran. They are much due to have the same attitude. Make it clear to Iran that there is a credible military option. It's not enough just to carry out exercises. Exercises are important. The kind of exercise we held with the Americans last week is extremely important. It definitely conveys a message, but it is not enough. Somebody has to say it. So once in a blue moon, the Americans say, in the last option, if worst come to worst, if whatever, then we should maybe do something. Definitely not very impressive from the point of view of the Iranians. Support the suffering of the Iranian people. The suffering Iranian people, sorry. Support the suffering Iranian people. That's basic. These people are trying to have freedom. Nobody cares. Or if they care, they don't really care. That's where we stand today. I want to say a few words about what does it mean for Israel. To finish by that. We used to have red lines regarding Iran. We don't have red lines anymore. Our red line, presented by Prime Minister Netanyahu at the time in 2012, was that if the Iranians will have 250 kilograms of uranium enriched to 20%, that's the chart he presented in the United Nations General Assembly. If the Iranians cross the 250 kilograms of uranium enriched to 20%, this is a red line for Israel. Well, guess what? They have 1,000 kilograms of uranium enriched to 20% right now, and on top of that they have 70 kilograms of uranium enriched already to 60%. And where's the red line? It's so everybody says the red line is 90%. 90% is too late. If the Iranians are going to have 90% enriched uranium, it's going to be too late to stop them. As a matter of fact, what we see now is that Iran keeps entrenching itself as the threshold nuclear state. Nobody wants to use the term and say Iran is a threshold nuclear state. But in fact, it is entrenching itself in this situation. Something has to be done about it right now. And from an Israeli point of view, it's a challenge that calls for action. Maybe other countries can afford having Iran as a nuclear state. We cannot afford it, as General Avivi explained in the beginning. Secondly, we are worried about the Russian rewards. Already it affects the capability to take care of the Iranian nuclear project. Already. And in the coming months it's going to be even more so. But what we are worried even more is that in one way or another the Russians will close an eye just because they need the Iranian support, will close an eye to some sort of contribution of certain Russian elements to solving the real Iranian problem at this time, which is shortening the time between having 90% uranium and having a bomb. The Iranians never did it. They need somebody who did it in order to help them shorten the time. And I'm very worried that something like that may happen at a certain point. It hasn't happened so far. I hope it won't, but I'm worried about the possibility. Secondly, another thing that hasn't happened, and I'm still worried, is that this can have an impact on our ability to operate in Syria as freely as we do today, based on our deconfliction mechanism with the Russians. So far, so good. Nothing happened. But the more Russia becomes dependent on Iranian support, this issue may be raised by the Iranians towards Moscow, asking them to take a different approach. And we have to be on alert for that. So far, as I said, it doesn't happen. And more widely, we as members of the West are worried about the threat and the challenge to Western order, the Western order, world order. We are also not in favor of seeing that happening. And we have to find a way to help the West to deal with that matter more effectively. It also affects the Middle East stability, and because of that directly has an impact on Israel's security, and it may bring about the beginning of the regional arms race, nuclear arms race, that we are so worried about for so many years, because everybody knows that Iran is already entrenching itself as a nuclear, threshold nuclear state. So why wait until the Iranians will actually have the weapon? So I'm not surprised that we see more connections between the Pakistanis and the Saudis, and more speaking about nuclear issues in other places, because this is the time to start the arms race. Nobody is going to take care of Iran. We should be prepared for such an eventuality. Finally, to end up with a positive note, and that doesn't compensate for the negative points, there are some opportunities in this situation. First of all, it is much easier to build an understanding with the West. For Israel, it's much easier to build an understanding with the West about the need to adopt a resolute stance towards Iran. I think my arguments are obvious. Everybody understands it. We see the kind of very close strategic collaboration that we have with the Americans these days, because they understand what I said. So they understand that something has to be done about Iran as well. It's less so with the Europeans, I must say, but most importantly with the Americans. Secondly, this is translated into closer cooperation with the United States, and the exercise is one expression of that. And finally, it gives a greater incentive for cooperation between Israel and the Arab forces worried about Iran, and for a bigger opportunity, for a greater incentive for the US to contribute to progress on normalization between us and Saudi Arabia. Because if you want to build a strong alliance that would face Iran and limit its capability to have an impact, its destabilizing impact on the Middle East, you need Israel and the United States and the Arab powers stand together in this respect. And I think this is an opportunity to convince both Saudi Arabia and the United States to find a solution to the petty issues that they have with each other, and come up together to face the real big, most important threat that exists, and this is the Iranian threat. So this is an opportunity for us, maybe, as General Avivi said, Netanyahu wants to see peace with Saudi Arabia. This creates paves the road to progress in this direction. Thank you.